We just witnessed a race that is going to show the true colors of fans and how much they actually understand the sport. This race might have been one of the best Bristol races in 10 years. It was refreshing, it was strategic, and it is what NASCAR has been looking for to improve their short track racing with the next gen car. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down my honest opinion on the Food City 500. I really encourage all fans to watch this video, even if you didn't like what you saw. I would at least like you to hear my opinion, and I would love to hear your opinions in the comments. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. So of course, the number one concern with this race was the tire and how good or bad people view it. This is the exact same tire compound that they used at Bristol last fall, and there were no big tire issues like there were today. However, they used resin to treat the bottom lane, whereas last year they used PJ1. The top lane never developed like last year's fall race, but we did get a middle groove, so there were still opportunities for people to pass besides just bumping them out of the way. The issue that occurred, if you will say it is an issue, isn't the tire compound. What we really need to look at is why the tire reacted to the resin in such a different way than the PJ1 and try to figure out an alternative to maybe making some minor tweaks if they need to be made. But I don't think the tire issue was as bad as people say. I will say that I'm extremely impressed with the amount of drivers, media personnel, and fans who actually agreed that this race was great. Most drivers in their post-race interviews were extremely supportive of the racing that occurred, but few drivers were not as impressed, and I feel like there was some frustration that contributes to them being upset with the racing that occurred. Most of the guys that didn't enjoy this type of racing were guys that struggled for most of the day, and it's kind of disappointing because it's not like every car's tires blew left and right. After the first stage, most of the veteran drivers and drivers who grew up running short tracks with this type of tire wear understood what the race was going to be and simply adjusted. This week we saw another record get broken, not just for the track of Bristol, but for the entire sport of NASCAR. The previous record for lead changes at Bristol was 40. We saw an impressive 54 lead changes, which is not only the most for Bristol, but for any short track in the NASCAR Cup Series. And it wasn't gimmicky lead changes where it was green flag pit stops, where guys were just completely blowing tires from the lead and other guys were capitalizing on their misfortune. We saw cars that were running the middle lane and getting around each other, and then lap traffic would come into play and they would have to battle back and forth between each other. But also, the tire wear did have some effect on the amount of lead changes. We saw guys that jumped out to big leads on the restarts and then they would fall off, and guys that saved were able to come and catch back up. So really, the tire wear did have some effect. What's extremely awesome about this is that all times during the race, first and second were within a second of each other, and sometimes back to fifth place was also within a second. And even though they were battling each other for second to fifth, first place still wasn't driving away because their tires were still getting worn as well. So this was really a race that showed who can manage tires, and that's where it affected the amount of lead changes, because you had guys who got out to these big leads, couldn't manage, and fell off. And then you guys that could manage made their way to the front, and then vice versa. People adjusted, and it was just like a back and forth between who can manage and who couldn't. To be more transparent and unbiased, I'm going to highlight one thing that I think they can do to improve this, and that is the progression of the tire wear. I feel like the cars were able to run their fast laps, and then out of nowhere, the cars would just fall off a cliff. And again, this goes back to being able to manage your stuff and being able to really know, like, okay, I shouldn't go this fast early in the run because I know I'm going to burn up my stuff at the end and not have anything. But I feel like cars really got to the point where even when they were saving stuff, it was like the car would just get to like that lap marker on the tire and it would just immediately just fall off a cliff and shred. I feel like if the tire had more of like a progression where it's like, okay, over the course of these next really 5 laps, it's really going to start to unravel, but really they hit that one lap and you just saw these guys would just go backwards immediately. So tire progression with the wear we can work on, but really again, I still think this comes down to being able to manage it more than anything. What's also cool about this style of racing is that when you have guys that understand how to manage their tires and not go 100% into the run the entire way, you see guys like Kaz Grala, Justin Haley, and other underdogs that you saw their driving ability and you saw what they're able to do with their cars that are less funded and don't have as much speed, but the fact that they're able to show off their talent and saving allowed them to have good runs for most of the day, and they were inside the top 15, at some points inside the top 10, almost as far up as 5th place. So definitely cool to see what drivers can do with their talent. Now I will say, to be transparent and to be unbiased, I think the race was great. Don't get me wrong. I think all short tracks should have this type of tire. Maybe not 40 or 50 laps they should wear. Maybe we can add another 10 to 20 laps on it. but it was concerning to see how rubber wasn't getting laid up at the top of the track. And again, this was more old school Bristol, but I'm a fan of the multi-groove Bristol as well. I think moving forward, NASCAR should ditch the resin and go back to the PJ1, keep the tire compound the exact same. There weren't any issues in the fall races when they used them. And look at the possibility of getting any traction compound altogether gone. See what happens for one race, just so we can have some type of transparency on if the racing is actually that good, if it's the tire, if it's the car, or if it's the traction compound that makes the race as good as what we saw today. We just need to know the actual source of how this racing is that good, and today we didn't really find that out. Another thing I want to note is that this was very similar to the racing we saw at Bristol in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Back then, it wasn't about just mashing the gas and driving as fast as you can for every lap. You actually had to manage your tires, your engine, your transmission, the whole car in general. Now with the next-gen car and the lower horsepower packages in the previous years, I feel like the younger drivers expect to get away with just mashing the throttle every lap and kicking the back tires off and having no consequences. And Kevin Harvick talked about this last week, that you shouldn't be able just to mash the gas every lap and not have consequences. If you are going to do that, you should see the consequences, and today we saw that. I feel like the 550 horsepower really trained a lot of drivers to just think that they're invincible and are able to just hold the throttle wide open and nothing bad will happen to them. If this race today had the drivers from old school, like your Mark Martins, your Jeff Gordons, Rusty Wallace, Darrell Waltrip, you would have saw a much different race, and you wouldn't have saw as many tires getting blown because those guys were in that era where this was what they dealt with. I'm definitely excited to see what NASCAR does moving forward with the tire compound, with traction compound, just to improve the short track racing with the next gen car because it's been so bad. I feel like today was a breath of fresh air, and really this was something that is a step in the right direction. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I would love to hear you guys' opinions and talk to you guys, not to argue, but to actually just talk about it. Hopefully I was able to change your mind if you didn't like the race, but if you still didn't like it, again, let me know why, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you guys about it. I really appreciate all the comments. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.